I'm Andrea Kuzmich. My paper is more on how Georgian polyphony conveys a sense of eternity or ancestry, musical analysis of temporal distortions in Georgian polyphony. In his research and analysis of Malagasy possession ceremonies, Ron Emoff proposed the aesthetics of remembering to explain the palpable power of ritual to recall the past. Emoff identifies this aesthetic as a heightened, creative, interdisciplinary social active meaning construction that is in large part reliant on an exceptional musical performance, which plays with and distorts our sense of time. Furthering Emoff's ideas in my 2018 paper on how Georgian polyphony conveys a sense of eternity, I suggested similar temporal distortions could be experienced in Georgian polyphony, and in this paper I elaborate on this by drawing parallels between Malagasy music and Georgian polyphony. In particular, Emoff equates this aesthetics of remembering with the Malagasy term maresaka and identifies it primarily as a musical or sound-oriented phenomenon that, among other things, involves a series of subtle variations, which he calls micropoetics. These micropoetics play on the listener's rhythmic perceptions and results in temporal distortions or aural illusions of shifting meter. I maintain, however, that instead of playing on rhythmic perceptions, the micropoetics in Georgian polyphony play on our sense of tonality. To make my case in this paper, I first elaborate on the aesthetics of remembering and maresaka, providing cultural context, musical examples, and explanations for the temporal distortions. Then I turn to Georgian polyphony, and using a simple musical example, I introduce questions of tonality in Georgian polyphonic songs, and then further explore how the polytonal quality exists, is reinforced, and/or is played with at the macro-structural level of the music, through the scale systems used, and the use of micropoetics, the subtle and numerous variations in performance. Ron Emoff, an ethnomusicologist and anthropologist, studies the music and ceremonial recollection practices of two marginalized ethnic groups in Tamatave, a town on the east coast of Madagascar. The healing aspects of these ceremonies requires and also contributes to the creation of a certain joyous, energetic aesthetic that is equated with the Malagasy term maresaka, which Emoff also labels as the aesthetics of remembering. And in his research and scholarship, he provides many interesting cases of how it results in an empowering act of meaning construction, which in essence is the healing aspect of the ritual. Maresaka more literally means good talk and is often used in everyday greetings, but when talking about Malagasy recollection ceremonies, it is used to highlight a social performative moment when the music is just right, there is groove, and a general good feeling ensues. It can involve social interactions, physical movement, visual stimuli, but according to Emoff, it is primarily a musically sound-oriented phenomenon. It is needed to conduct a ceremony, but at the same time, it also results from ceremonial performance through, quote, the sound, motion, emotion, and commotion of ancestral spirits interacting and celebrating joyously in the present with the living. Music that accompanies and is essential to this possession ceremony is based on a shaker called a kayamba, usually made of bamboo, and a melodic instrument, either the diatonic accordion introduced to Madagascar in the late 19th century, or as you can see in this video, a valija, a diatonically tuned zither-like instrument, tube or box-shaped. Even within the first few seconds of listening to some of Emoff's field recordings, we can feel the push and pull of the rhythm between the percussion instruments and the melodic instruments. In the example I'm about to play, one can easily identify the compound rhythm, the groupings of three, in the shaker. But if you pay a little closer attention to the accordion, it doesn't quite fit with our expectations of compound meter. So I've slowed the recording down to about 1/3 the original speed, and you can easily hear the compound division of the shaker, tsk, 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 easily. But listen to the additive meter in the accordion. The 12 beats are broken down into groups of 7 and 5, where the 7 is divided into 3 plus 2 plus 2, and the group of 5 into 5 plus 2. But also listen for then further breakdown of that grouping. Have a listen. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So the groupings now are changing again. So on top of this additive meter are more subtle variations, like what I think I hear in the accordion is an introduction of a 3-note run played 2 times. So the 7 grouping now is broken into a 3 plus 3 plus 1. And sometimes I hear a 3 plus 1 plus 3 pattern. We can see a similar multimeter effect in the transcription he provides of a ceremonial performance that includes the valija. Is the meter here an inner 6-beat subdivision, a 2-beat grouping of 6 as represented by the kayamba, or is it an inner 4-pulse meter as represented by the valija? Emoff further observes within performance that the shaker may displace its alignment with the valija, thereby again creating an aural shift, which is just not an aural experience, but a physical, visceral one. This, in effect, is the manipulation or distortion of musical time. Individual parts shift in and out of phase with one another, which plays with the brain's ability to perceive time. Emoff, in describing his own experiences of the music, notes an awareness of 2 different time frames, yet unable to distinctly hear or focus on one or the other clearly, which results in a sense of ungroundedness. Malagasy themselves had an expression for this role of the music, which literally means to alter time. This temporal reordering and the resulting aural illusion is a key component to maresaka and sets up a reorientation of time needed to conflate the past and the present so that the past, via the ancestors, may appear to the living. Of course, this phenomenon of time, this aural illusion, is not limited to Malagasy music. Emoff references other African music scholars who speak of such aural illusions, and analogies have been made to the optical illusion of Rubens' goblet. Depending on how you focus on it, you either see a vase or 2 faces. Essential to the temporal distortions that Emoff describes above are the numerous subtle variations that occur when repeating small melodic units. Emoff uses the term micropoetics to describe these. Examples can include different groupings of the inner pulse of the kayamba or the melodic instruments, a single change in the order of a 3-note run or 4-note run or whatever. Or the flurry, the density of pulses from the kayamba. Of course, these examples are only a few of what may seem like an endless possibility of microvariations, the effects of which lead to the constant reordering and reorganizing of the musical content used during ceremony, which results in temporal distortions. But distortions that result from a play with the rhythm typically do not occur in Georgian polyphony, which is not as rhythmically dense or complex. Rather than playing with the rhythmic content to create an aural illusion, the micropoetics in Georgian polyphony play with the tonal content, because in Georgian polyphony there are not multiple meters experienced, but it can be argued there are multiple tonal centers. So this next section will elaborate on the polytonal nature of Georgian polyphony and on the micropoetics that play with it. Similar to the micropoetics that Emoff speaks of, these include many subtle variations in the order of notes and rhythmic groupings of smaller units of melodic content. However, they also involve small changes in tonal material and the complex overlay of multiple tonal systems, all of which play with our expected perceptions and lead to temporal distortions. So, having completed the discussion on maresaka, and before I turn to the musical example of satsekwao, I want to first review how Georgian polyphony's structure is polytonal in nature. Then I will use the simple musical example of satsekwao to highlight some issues of how tonality may be perceived, which leads to more discussion about tuning, scale system, and micropoetics in Georgian polyphony. The nature of Georgian polyphony, its aesthetic principle that favors dissonance, linked with the fact that most Georgian polyphony consists of 3 vocal parts performed within a narrow range, already results in a polytonal sonic experience. The 3 parts typically spaced within a tenth are not tertiary based and often result in the dissonant sonorities. For those in the West accustomed to functional harmony, such dissonance combined with a missing 4th note often creates a suspended polytonal feeling with unexpected resolutions. Take, for example, the common Georgian chord built on the C, F, G, or the 1-4-5 chord, what Dmitry Arikashvili describes as foundational to Georgian songs. In Western musical practices, this chord is known as a suspended chord. It is unclear which note is the tonic. Is the bottom the tonic via the do-so relationship between the outer notes? Or is the fourth the tonic, do-so? Without much thought, I can list many songs from various regions whose first chord is intervallically equivalent to the CFG chord, like Svan Makruli, Acharuli Makruli, Erekles Mrabal Jamir from Kacheti, the chant Alleluia, Batonebo from Samagrelo, and there are many others. The use of this chord and others similarly The use of this chord and other similarly vague sonorities already suggests Georgian polyphony is playing with our sense of tonality. However, this is not sufficient to engender the play of senses that leads to temporal distortions. So I turn to a musical example and briefly explore some ways tonality may function within the song. Consider a rather simple Georgian Kakhetian dance song, Satse Kwao, recorded by Mravel Jamier, a choir based in Kakheti. The song is simple because it is based on a 2-bar call from the second voice and a 2-bar reply in which only the last bar has all 3 voices active. This pattern is repeated a few times with some slight variations in the call when a second 4-bar section is inserted. The song returns to the first 4 bars again, repeating again with the variations in the call before the second 4-bar pattern is injected again, and so on. Now, if we follow Roy Travis's observations that music is tonal from how it unfolds through time, a particular tone, interval, or chord, we can already make some interesting observations in the first 4 bars about possible ways tonality may be experienced. For instance, it is possible to define the first tonal center by the first bar, and some may also include the second bar, which centers around the C. However, I can also hear the last note in the second bar as a note leading to or resolving to a tonal center defined by the A repeated by the A, a tonal center defined by the repeated A in the base of the third bar. Interesting to note, however, is that the octave A at the end of the bar in the ascending tetrachord of the top voice does not sound like a stable tone we associate with the tonal center, perhaps due to the note's short duration or its melodic development. It's also interesting to note that the octave A's in the 6th bar also do not sound like a stable note to me, but I don't have enough time to explore this here. Another tonal section may be defined by the 4th bar, where all 3 voices are at play. However, the question of a defining center is up for debate. Maybe it's the G, the root of the major triad in the last note of the bar. But in context of the preceding bars, one may hear a resolution to the A, though the scalar relationship is different than the previous bars, perhaps because the B natural in the middle voice is now a stable 2 beats in the 4th bar, where previously it toggled between a B natural and B flat. Interestingly, if A is the tonal center, it has not actually been sung in the last bar, nor in the following 2 bars, even when variations are performed. So even with this simple notational representation of a simple song, there are already many puzzling questions about the tonal center. Turn to some of the more observable aural details that notational representation just can't accommodate. And of course, there are a few more significant developments about tonality, which have to do with the intonation of individual notes. The notated example doesn't account for variations with the B naturals and B flats, nor the F naturals and F sharps, or the fact that what looks like a whole step on the staff is actually smaller than this. For example, the B flat is always tuned slightly higher, which, using the program Transcribe, I approximated to be about 30 to 50 cents. That being observed, the B's from this recording in general do follow the shape of the notation. But as the song gets faster, the B's start mixing this up such that the B flat in the second bar of the solo line is sung closer to a B natural, and the B natural resolving to the third bar is sung closer to a B flat. This happens even in earlier repeats where the difference, while it's not quite the same, it starts getting fuzzy. I've also heard other performances of this song where the B's are mixed up even earlier in the slower sections. Turning to the F's, we should note that for the most part, there are consistent differences in the top voices between the F sharp top voice between the F sharp and the F, as is written in the transcription. However, the middle voice sings yet a different F. This one is slightly smaller than an F sharp and results in something of a neutral third with the top voice. But as the song gets faster, the tuning of this F, both as a melodic and harmonic interval, also becomes more variable. This highlights questions of tuning systems and scales in Georgian polyphony and how these further contribute to the experience of polytonality in Georgian songs. Theories on Georgian scales are abundant and sometimes competing in the literature. Despite the controversies, there are a number of relevant observations that can contribute to our understanding of how multiple tonalities may be perceived. First is the presence of a neutral third and other inconsistent melodic intervals, which were briefly identified in the Satsekwa example. Also is the idea that Georgian polyphonic scales are monotonic and based on a pentachord, a scale of a perfect fifth divided into 4 steps of approximately 175 cents, which also explains a neutral third. As is noted by many scholars, however, there's a lot of variability for the interpretation of these intervals, variations to accommodate regional differences, difference between villages, or even differences between individual performers. For Kartli-Kakhetian songs, there are further discussions that theorize on 2 different tonal systems coexisting. One similar to the music of the Middle East, based on tetrachords, which govern the top voice, and one based on pentachords that govern the bottom voice. Most interesting are very recent studies using computational analysis of Georgian polyphony, which have also demonstrated what seem like a dual tonal system. However, in this case, one system governs melodic intervals while a different tonal system is for vertical harmonic intervals. In these studies, similar to other theories on Georgian scales, the melodic intervals are based on a step approximated to 170 cents, but harmonic intervals of a step are calculated closer to 200 cents. This research is impressive and exciting for all those interested in the study of Georgian polyphony. However, most of the musical examples are from Svanati, though a few have included Gurian songs, Acharyan songs, some chants, and some repertoire from a choir of Tbilisi. None, however, seem yet to have addressed Kartli-Kakhetian songs, and it would be particularly interesting to see how computational analysis will measure the tonal organization of what is already accepted as a dual tonal system. Nonetheless, from the many field expeditions and many songs already evaluated, the suggestion that there are different tonal systems for the melodic and harmonic intervals seems hard to refute, and only validates how the perception of tonality in Georgian songs continues to be a worthy element to explore and may very well contribute to the experiences of aural illusions and temporal distortions. But even beyond this multi-tonal system, the micropoetics in performance, the multitude of subtle variations in pitches as well as in improvisation, further play with our perceptions of tonality. My master's thesis, which addresses the issues of variability in performance of Georgian songs, documented the multitude of possible variations that occurred in 5 different performances of the Gurian song Vakhtang Guri, recorded between 1929 and 2004. These charts and images try to summarize variations between the different choruses and trios and help visualize possible melodic variations. I also discussed tuning differences between the differing ensembles, as well as differences within individual performances. My attempt to document this involved measuring the pitch of the resolving interval from the trio to the chorus, which varied within a single performance. Thankfully, the sophisticated computational analysis work by Sherbam and others demonstrates such variability much more clearly than I was able to. Looking at these graphs from the computational analysis, there's still a lot of variability in the execution of these intervals, as can most easily be seen by these gray markings, or can be understood by the standard deviation reported, which in this case varies from 24 cents to over 100 cents, a clearly obvious audible amount. In my thesis, however, I also noted some significant incidents of tuning what seemed to be a slightly augmented fourth that created a shimmer or buzz within some of the performances. I have heard and attempted to sing this interval many times, knowing it to be a particularly pleasing one for its unusualness and its visceral effect. It is clearly a valued aesthetic, and another one of the many possible micropoetics we can talk about in Georgian polyphony, though this buzz or shimmer is a regional characteristic particular to Guria. I do want to note that while the variants are seemingly endless in some of the trio sections of Vahtanguri, especially those without text, those with text have far less room for variation, but the use of this shimmering interval adds a particularly unexpected energy, which is yet another example of how the micropoetics of performance can play with our perceptions. So you can have some context of the effect of this variation. I played excerpts of 2 consecutive trios where the second has the buzz or the shimmer. However, I have to stress that listening to it in isolation like this is not as effective as listening to it in the context of the whole piece. All these possibilities for variation in intervals add to the complex micropoetics performed in Georgian polyphony. Whether they be the subtle choice of singing a B flat, B natural, or something in between, as mentioned in the Satsequao example, or the over hundreds, perhaps thousands of permutations that can take place in a song like Vaktanguri. A multitude of subtle musical and rhythmic variations are an integral part of Georgian polyphony. These micropoetics play with our expectations, and the choice of how a pitch is sung can have so many different tonal implications within the moment-to-moment unfolding of a Georgian song. It is hoped that the above discussion has demonstrated that the micropoetics in Georgian polyphony play with our sense of tonality, just as the micropoetics in Malagasy ceremonial music play with our sense of time. This interplay with our expectations and the possible simultaneous perceptions of multiple tonalities leads to aural illusions and temporal distortions. Aural illusions and temporal distortions are themselves, however, not significant enough to recall the past and perform ancestry. They are made into more profound meaning-making experiences when the physicality of the sound, its visceral effect, functions in association with some form of social context, whether that be a remembered one or a synchronous one, and moments of joyousness result. As Emoff describes in these moments, sonic sensibilities intertwine with physical, emotional, as well as social experiences, and, quote, the musical performance transforms the past into something alive and palpable. Thus, the music is experienced as part of a larger cultural expression, the interdisciplinary nature of which allows for the jump from aural illusions in real time to the experience of timelessness required to recall the ancestors. Thank you.